Okay, so we've got this stack of sources here, and they all point to one absolutely legendary machine, the Beast of Turin.
That's the one, the Fiat S76.
And our mission today is really to dig into these sources you've shared, pull out the story of this incredible car.
Exactly. And what a story it is. Built way back in 1910, and honestly, that nickname, it absolutely nails it. This car was built for one reason only: speed. Pure, terrifying speed.
So we'll get into, how it came about, the absolutely wild technical details, those crazy record attempts, and then this amazing modern restoration. It sounds incredible. Where do we even start?
Well, you really have to go back to the time before World War I. Think about the mood, especially after, say, 1905. The Edwardian era in Britain.
Right.
It was this period of intense innovation. You had brilliant people all over the world just obsessed with making cars faster, on tracks like Brooklands or just flat out in a straight line.
And the main way they thought about speed back then was, well, it was pretty straightforward, wasn't it? Aerodynamics wasn't really a thing yet.
Not in the way we understand it now, no. So if you wanted more speed, you need more power. Simple as that.
Which, in 1910, basically meant one thing.
Bigger engines.
Yeah.
Just massive engines. And that brings us straight to Fiat's big rival.
Ah, the competition.
Yep, Benz and C over in Germany. In 1909, they rolled out the Blitz-and-Benz. Now, that was a statement.
What was under the hood of that one?
A 21.5-liter inline-4. Huge. Making around 200 horsepower.
Which is enough for the record books back then.
Oh, yeah. It took the land speed record at Brooklands, averaged 126 miles an hour over a flying kilometer.
126 miles, that's what, 203 kilometers per hour?
Exactly.
Think about that. Breaking 200 kilometers per hour, that is just mind-blowing speed for the time.
Absolutely staggering. And there's this interesting bit of context, too, about racing itself. The French Grand Prix, the big race, they actually stopped holding it between 1908 and 1911.
Why was that?
Because their cars just couldn't keep up with the Mercedes, which, included Benz back then. They were getting beaten.
Huh. So, no Grand Prix. What did manufacturers do to show off for publicity, for sales?
Land speed records. That became the new arena, the place to prove you were the best, the fastest. It was all about brand image.
And Fiat saw an opportunity.
Definitely. They were already building some pretty advanced stuff. Their S74 Grand Prix car, for instance, had a 14-liter engine, 16 valves, overhead cam.
Sophisticated for the era, right? Not just a simple pushrod design.
Not at all. Very advanced. So they looked at the Blitz-and-Benz record, and they thought, we can do better. They deliberately set out to build something. Well, something even more extreme, something nobody had ever tried before in a car.
The S76. The Beast. Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts. You mentioned extreme. That engine size is just staggering.
It really is the heart of it, isn't it? We're talking 28.5 liters, 28,353 cubic centimeters to be precise.
Good grief.
Yeah. The sources describe the pistons as being bigger than paint cans. Just try and picture the scale of that inside an engine block.
It's almost impossible. And the power output. Around 300 horsepower, which maybe doesn't sound that huge for the size today, but...
But that's not the real story. The horsepower is one thing, but the torque.
Right.
That's the killer stat here.
The twisting force.
Exactly. Estimates put it around 2,000 foot-pounds of torque. 2,000, and get this, it delivers that peak torque at just 1,000 RPM. Basically, just off idle.
Whoa.
So imagine the shove. It didn't need high revs to accelerate like a missile.
Yeah.
It's completely different feeling to a high-revving race engine. And think about it. 1910 technology, producing more torque than a modern Bugatti Veyron. Just an incredible piece of engineering for its day.
2,000 foot-pounds. That's just...
Yeah, almost unbelievable. How did they even achieve that? Was it purely the sheer displacement, the long stroke?
Yeah, it was the main factor, yes. It was designed purely for low-end grunt, massive pulling power, not chasing high RPM horsepower figures. But it wasn't just brute force either. It had those advanced features we touched on.
Like the overhead cam. Right, a 16-valve overhead camshaft design. Much more efficient, allow the engine to breathe better than the simpler pushrod engines common at the time. Pushrods can flex, overhead cams are more direct.
And starting this monster, definitely not a key turn.
Oh, absolutely not. No starter motor. You had a Trembler coil ignition system, needed a Bosch high-voltage magneto, and you had to swing a starting handle. It was a whole procedure.
Complex.
Very. 2 spark plugs per cylinder as well, just to make sure that huge fuel-air mix actually ignited reliably.
What about the rest of the car? Cooling? Drivetrain?
Water cooled naturally.
Yeah.
Power went to the rear wheels via a chain drive, which was pretty common for high-power cars then. Suspension was basic leaf springs, front and rear, and it had a 4-speed gearbox, including reverse, thankfully.
Huh, yes, probably needed it.
Yeah.
Any other interesting details?
Well, the radiator design they developed for the S76, apparently Fiat later used aspects of it on their regular road cars.
Oh, really? So this extreme project actually fed back into their mainstream production.
Seems so. A little bit of trickle-down tech, even back then.
And all this massive engine, it must have completely dominated the car's appearance.
Absolutely. The engine was so tall, the metal covering over it had to stand incredibly high. It gives the car these really strange, almost comical proportions.
And heavy, I assume?
Yeah, around 3,700 pounds or just under 1,700 kilos. And you can bet a huge chunk of that was the engine itself.
Now, you mentioned something earlier. This idea that it had an airplane engine, that comes up a lot, doesn't it?
It does. It's a really persistent myth.
Yeah.
People often compare it to later cars like the Brutus or Babs, which genuinely did shoehorn massive aero engines into car chassis.
Right, those were famous examples.
But the S76 wasn't like that. Now, Fiat did build a very similar 28.5-liter engine, but it was for airships, and it came a bit later, around 1912, 1913.
Ah, okay.
And it has slightly different specs, 3 valves per cylinder, 3 spark plugs. The S76 car engine was definitely built earlier, 1910, 1911, and it was derived from Fiat's racing car engine experience. It wasn't an airship engine dropped into a car.
So purpose-built for the car. Even respected historians got that wrong initially.
Yeah, even Bill Body, a well-known motorsport historian, apparently got corrected on that point later on. So unlike some of those other specials, the S76 engine was conceived from the ground up for this specific record-breaking purpose.
Okay, so Fiat builds this.
Right.
This monster, utterly terrifying machine. What next? You need someone to actually drive the thing.
And that wasn't easy. Fiat genuinely had trouble finding drivers brave enough. I mean, the power, the torque, the vibration, the sheer noise, it was properly intimidating.
There's that funny line in one source about needing a big, thick mustache to handle it.
Huh. Yeah, maybe that was the secret. Felice Nazzaro, the famous Italian racer, he had to go.
How did that end?
He described it as a vortex of sound. Took it for one drive, said, nope, not for me, basically. But not before giving it that nickname that stuck it, the Beast of Turin.
Fitting. So who did step up?
Pietro Bordino was one. She took it to Brooklyn's first, aiming to beat the Benz record.
How did that go?
Not great. Apparently, the track surface was just too bumpy, too rough, and the noise was overwhelming. He couldn't really push it to its absolute limit there.
So where next?
He drove it north, up to Saltburn Sands on the coast. Much smoother surface, potentially.
And the drive up there sounds like a story in itself.
Oh, yeah. The anecdote is brilliant. He had an English mechanic, George Scales, with him, who apparently couldn't get Bordino to slow down going through villages. The noise was supposedly blowing people's hats off, even singeing pedestrians' hair as they blasted through.
Incredible. Did Saltburn work out better for the record attempt?
A bit better. The conditions weren't ideal. Apparently, the sand was quite wet. Other cars were struggling to even hit 80-mile-an-hour. But Bordino managed to break the flying mile record, hit 119-mile-an-hour.
Still seriously quick, but not the kilometer record.
No, not quite. The Benz still held the faster flying kilometer record at 126-mile-an-hour. So close, but not quite there.
Okay, and Fiat built 2 of these beasts, right?
That's right. The second S76 was sold to a Russian prince, Boris Sukhanov.
A prince owned one. Wild.
Yeah. And the prince hired an American driver named Arthur Duray, who apparently also sported the required significant mustache.
Of course he did. So Duray had a crack at the record.
He did. This was late 1913 in Austin, Belgium. They found a straight stretch of tarmac road, this time much better for top speed.
Did he do it?
He absolutely flew, officially timed at 132.5 miles per hour.
Wow. That's 213 kilometers per hour faster than the Benz. That's the record then.
It should have been. But
Yeah.
the rules, you needed those 2 runs, opposite directions, within 1 hour.
Oh, the catch.
Exactly. And everything seemed to conspire against them. The timing equipment was pretty primitive, apparently quite unreliable. The weather was bad. It was November, December.
They're not ideal for record runs.
Not at all. And then there was the killer blow, the local tram director.
The tram director? What on earth?
Seriously, there were tram tracks running right alongside the road they were using, and the director absolutely refused to halt the tram service.
You're kidding.
Nope. So they had these huge delays between runs waiting for trams to clear. Made it completely impossible to complete the 2 runs within the required hour.
That is just unbelievably frustrating. Hitting the speed, proving the car could do it, but being denied by trams.
It's bizarre, isn't it? And Duray himself wrote about it, saying you needed the courage of 1,000 men just to drive the thing flat out. He reckoned it actually went even faster after the measured kilometer, maybe over 140 miles per hour.
But the official record never stood.
Never awarded by the French authorities, no. All down to those technicalities and the stubborn tram guy.
And that probably fueled that later view of the car. You mentioned someone called it a fiasco or ugly duckling.
Yeah, Lawrence Pomeroy, writing after the war. Because it never officially got that ultimate record. Despite clearly having the speed, it got this slightly unfair reputation in some circles. A real shame.
So after these near misses and frustrations, what happened to the two cars? They sort of vanished, didn't they?
Pretty much faded from view. And part of that was likely down to Fiat's own policy back then.
What was that?
At the end of a racing season, they apparently used to dismantle their works race cars.
Really? Why?
To stop competitors getting hold of them and copying their technology. Industrial secrecy, even then.
So the S76s were broken up.
Seems likely parts were separated. We know the second car, Duray's 1, survived intact until at least 1919. But after that, things get murky. For decades, it looked like that was it. End of the story.
Until one man got obsessed.
Exactly. Duncan Pittaway. It started, apparently, with seeing a picture in a book when he was a kid.
Wow.
And years later, talking with friends who were into Edwardian cars, that spark was reignited.
And it became more than just interest.
Oh, yeah. It turned into this epic 15-year quest. He started hunting for pieces. And incredibly, he found the chassis, the axles, the running gear from the first car.
Amazing. But what about the engine, the heart of the beast?
That's the miracle part. He tracked down the engine from the second car, the Duray car. It was basically the only major bit Fiat themselves had actually kept hold of.
Incredible detective work, and then the restoration. That must have been a mammoth task.
Absolutely immense. He talks about making trip after trip to Turin in Italy to negotiate getting the engine. Likens it to the gold heist in the Italian Job.
Huh. I can imagine. And the engine itself needed work.
Oh, it was seized solid after decades. He had to completely rebuild it, recreate things like the connecting rods, the valve springs. But there's this amazing detail about the crankshaft.
What's that?
He deliberately chose not to get a crack tested.
What? Why on earth not? That sounds risky.
His logic, as he puts it, is rather not know. He figures if there are tiny cracks, finding out might mean he couldn't use it. He'd rather just run it and see what happens, deal with it if it ever fails. It says a lot about his whole approach.
That's bold. A philosophy of using it, not just preserving it statically.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the engine. The gearbox had to be recreated from scratch using the original Fiat drawings.
Yeah.
That alone took 2 years and a lot of money.
And putting it all together?
Had to be done piece by piece inside the chassis. Then the bodywork meticulously recreated by studying old photos. He mentions one particular studio photo that showed amazing detail, right down to the type of screws used.
He sounds like a real perfectionist about authenticity.
Absolutely. He apparently gets quite stressed about tiny inaccuracies he sees in other restorations, really dedicated to getting it right.
And then, the big moment. Firing it up after a century of silence.
You imagine the nerves. He said he was incredibly nervous, but with help from friends, they got it started. The beast roared back to life.
Must have been unbelievable. And the reaction since it's been running.
Huge. Absolutely huge.
Yeah.
Pittaway jokes it's like having a really famous pet. People know him because they know the car.
It's brought this legend back into the world, but driving it can't be easy.
Oh, far from it. The descriptions of driving it today are just fantastic.
What does Pittaway say it's like?
He compares it to wrestling a big hairy gorilla most of the time. Says everything it does is just extreme. And he's honest. It scares him. Starting, it scares him. Driving, it scares him.
Especially things like braking, I imagine?
Oh, definitely. You've only got brakes on the rear wheels, really. Plus a handbrake that offers limited help. The foot brake, apparently useless, gets covered in oil.
So how do you stop it?
Very carefully. He says on a track like Goodwood, you have to start braking miles before a corner, trying to slide it to slow down, like they might have done back in the day. Because it just doesn't feel comfortable or right in this car.
But it's still incredibly fast when you open it up.
Absolutely. The gearing is sky high. Apparently, 1,000 RPM in top gear is already 128 miles per hour.
Wow. So it's actually quite relaxed at speed.
Bizarrely, yes. He says doing nearly 100 miles per hour on the motorway felt like cruising at 50. It just lopes along. But driving it slowly is the hard part. Interestingly, he also says it's surprisingly capable in the wet. Good enough to qualify on the front row at the Goodwood Revival once.
That's unexpected.
Yeah.
And just the sheer presence of the thing.
Must be immense. The noise was already causing complaints back in 1911. And the flames.
Ah, yes, the flame.
Spits hellfire, they say. 2 yards of flame out of the exhausts, apparently enough to singe people's hair, set off fire alarms in petrol stations. The whole car just shakes violently when the engine coughs.
It sounds like a living thing, a very angry living thing.
Pretty much. And practical, not so much.
Fuel consumption must be terrible.
With that engine, you bet.
Yeah.
And it only has a tiny 10-gallon fuel tank. So stops are very, very frequent. He mentioned one trip, 146 miles, required 11 fuel stops.
11 stops, good grief. Any other funny stories about running it?
He talks about coasting into petrol stations sometimes, trying to hide the flames from the staff until he's at the pump. And another time, the clutch fork broke on a road trip in France, and they had to bodge repair in a village using silver solder. Owning this car is definitely an adventure.
It really brings home that while the S76 had this purpose-built engine, that whole era saw different approaches to extreme speed. You mentioned the Brutus, Babs. Those used actual airplane engines, right?
Exactly. So you have people like Fiat meticulously designing a car engine, albeit a monstrous one, and others just thinking, let's grab the biggest engine we can find, maybe from a plane, and stuff it in a car chassis. Different philosophies, same goal. Ultimate speed.
So the Beast is alive and roaring. What's next for it? Does Duncan Pittaway have plans?
Oh, yes. Definitely plans to keep using it. There's talk of driving it to France next May for the 100th anniversary of the Montlhéry circuit, which is kind of a sister track to Brooklyn's.
That sounds like quite a road trip.
It does. And maybe another road trip down to the Salon Road in the south of France, another historic speed record location.
And what about Ostend? Finishing unfinished business.
That seems to be the big one. The plan is definitely there. Go back to Ostend and this time officially nail that record. Get to 2 runs over 126 miles per hour done within the hour.
How would they time it now?
Use modern speed cameras, probably. Do it discreetly, maybe at dawn. Pittaway's quote is great. If you don't ask, nobody can say no.
Love that attitude. It really sums up his whole approach, doesn't it? These cars aren't museum pieces.
Not to him, no. He calls them art in motion. They're meant to be driven, experienced, heard, felt, no matter how difficult or terrifying they might be.
It's a powerful idea, which kind of leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it?
Definitely. You look back at that Edwardian era, the sheer nerve of the designers building these things and the drivers wrestling them down bumpy tracks or sandy beaches with almost zero safety features.
It's a different world. The audacity is just incredible compared to how we approach performance and safety today.
Or maybe you think about the value of what Duncan Pittaway has done, not just saving history, but making it live again, letting this incredible fire-breathing beast loose on the world to be seen and heard as it was meant to be over a century later. Is that more valuable than keeping it silent behind velvet ropes?